Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 Peerless Tang Men based on novel. So let's start. Nan Xiuqiu evidently didn't like Feng Ling, and twisted her lips as she said, he only sleeps after he eats. Huo Yuhao said, let him sleep then. This region is very dark, thus this hotel is safer than the one in the north. Later, just proceed to the location that we've decided on. Once I finish things over here, I'll go over to find you immediately. Don't act blindly. There'll be at least a class 6 or 7 soul engineer over there, as well as several evil soul masters standing guard. If you expose yourself, you can forget about saving your mother. Nan Xiuqiu replied without any hesitation, okay, I'll listen to you. I won't barge in blindly. I'll wait for you to come. If you don't come after a day, I'll... Huo Yuhao's expression turned serious at this moment. If I still don't arrive in a day, you must think of a way to leave this place. Don't think about rescuing anyone anymore. Otherwise, the bloodline of the Earth Dragon sect will never be passed down. Do you think that will be what your mother wants to see? Nan Xiuqiu's was moved, and she suddenly hugged Huo Yuhao tightly. We'll succeed, won't we? Huo Yuhao couldn't bear to push her away, as he felt her body tremble. He gently patted her back, yes, we'll succeed. All of this will be over, and everything will be fine again. Thanks. If you can save my mother and the disciples of the Earth Dragon sect, we'll do anything for the Tang sect in the future. Huo Yuhao smiled and said, silly girl. You are a part of the Tang sect. How can you speak on behalf of the Earth Dragon sect? Nan Xiuqiu relaxed her hug, and took 2 steps back. After this, she wore a displeased expression on her face. You aren't even as old as me yet. Don't always think that you can act like an elder. You're not even 20, but you act like you're 40. An upset look flashed across Huo Yuhao's eyes. Yes. His mental age was far older than most others of the same age, which was a result of the unfortunate events he had experienced when he was younger, as well as everything that had occurred afterward. It was also because of this that he could play a leading role in the Tang sect, became the youngest member of the Sea Gods Pavilion in Shrek Academy, and was the first to complete the ultimate soldier plan. Huo Yuhao took in a deep breath and checked everything he had on him before he said resolutely to Nan Xiuqiu, let's go. Yes. Nan Xiuqiu nodded. The two of them quickly left the hotel before they proceeded in 2 different directions. Huo Yuhao's destination was very close, so he stopped after only walking for a short while. As he made a turn, he silently entered a narrow, dark alley. Even though there were high-altitude surveillance soul tools above him, he couldn't possibly be detected without the use of thermal detectors. At the north of the city, Hikaitu was standing at a window and watching the sky. It was getting closer and closer to the agreed-upon time. The 4 who had snuck out through the southern city gate were now waiting quietly 25 kilometers from this same city gate. There were simply too many surveillance soul tools in Sunrise City. There were even soul tools stationed outside the city, which prevented them from getting close. They were also waiting for their opportunity to come. It was getting darker and darker. The darker it was, the worse the effect of the surveillance soul tools. Of course, such a situation wasn't going to last for long. Once high-altitude surveillance soul tools were able to be combined with thermal detectors, there would be significant improvements in the aspect of high-altitude surveillance. Everything was in place, and it was about time to begin. An instruction suddenly sounded in Hikaitu's mind. A passionate look suddenly flashed across Hikaitu's eyes. He rubbed his right hand across his bald head and turned around immediately. He faced all the soul tools that he had installed in the room. A huge ring on his right hand shone, and a dark red barrel around a meter long with a 10-centimeter caliber appeared in his grasp. He took 1 step forward and was behind the Class 8 egg-shaped soul tool. He pointed the dark red barrel upward. The structure of this hotel was very simple. There were only several 2-story buildings. They were in a room which was on the 2nd floor of one of the buildings. Red lights rose silently at this point. A huge hole was vaporized in the roof of this room when the red light from the barrel was fired at it. No dust fell from the roof. Hikaitu became more and more excited. He swept his barrel quickly, and many sections of the roof were disintegrated in a matter of seconds. Very soon, the roof ceased to exist entirely. At this point, the starfishes that had helped to conceal the soul power undulations from this room earlier were no longer in effect. Hikaitu quickly retracted the barrel in his hand, and it turned into a disc-like item. At the same time, he stepped on a semicircular piece of metal that wasn't very eye-catching below the base of the egg-shaped soul tool. One end of that soul tool immediately cracked open, and a pitch-black barrel slowly extended out. Blinding red light started to shine within this barrel, and the 24 milk bottles inside the base started to release soul power. The soul power undulations that were generated as a result immediately triggered alarms in the city. Hikaitu wore a calm expression on his face, but there was a wild look in his eyes. He moved his right hand rapidly on the disc and kept on pressing it. A soul cannon that was pointed towards the sky started to light up. Following this, fierce gusts of wind started to rage. The impact caused by the tremendous soul power undulations didn't just cause the roof to be torn apart. The surrounding walls also collapsed, and close to 100 streaks of flowing light were targeted and shot towards the sky instantly. Apart from that egg-shaped soul tool in this room, there were also 10 Juga divine crossbow cannons. Each cannon was completely filled with stationary soul cannon shells. In the first wave of attack, 180 Class 4 shells were fired. In monetary terms, the cost of all the shells in these 10 cannons was enough to cover half a year of Sunrise City's revenue. Sunrise City was indeed tightly guarded. When more than 100 streaks of lights were fired, countless soul rays and soul cannon lights started shining near the closest north wall before they were fired to intercept the streaks of incoming light. Outside the city, the Northern Legion of Soul Engineers also started to gather a lot of firepower to intercept the incoming attack. They formed a huge interception net in the air and tried to stop all of the incoming shells. Things started to get messy inside Sunrise City too. No matter how fast they reacted, the troops in the city would only be able to arrive after 15 minutes. Hikaitu didn't seem to have seen the changes in the sky. Right now, he had already focused his energy on the egg-shaped soul tool. The scarlet red light was gradually turning golden red at the front of this soul tool. The terrifying soul power undulations even caused Hikaitu to feel a little breathless. He was pressing the other side of this egg-shaped soul tool right now, specifically on a red button with a skull on it. Rings of demonic patterned lights quickly surged upward from the base of the soul tool. When this entire soul tool turned golden red, Hikaitu pressed this button with force. Suddenly, the surrounding air distorted tremendously, and the high-altitude surveillance soul tools within this region lost their effect. They could only detect distorted waves. Following this, a ball of cone-shaped, golden red light was fired from that barrel and quickly rose into the sky. In the blink of an eye, it crossed the city wall and was northbound. There were people in charge of the high-altitude surveillance soul tools over where the Northern Legion of Soul Engineers was. In the entire continent, the Sun Moon Empire's Soul Engineer legions had the greatest fighting experience with soul tools. Once they discovered that something was wrong, this area started to sound with deafening alarms. Following this, halos were quickly released. In the blink of an eye, they formed 3 layers of barriers that protected this area. Soul Engineer legions were terrifying, because they contained many soul engineers. When there were sufficient soul tools and soul engineers, the strength of a soul engineer legion could far surpass a single soul engineer. As they erected their defense, this legion of soul engineers focused their firepower towards the sky. They targeted the ball of golden red light that Hikaitu fired into the sky. Whether it was in terms of their reaction time or their methods, the Sun Moon Empire's soul engineering legions were on point. They were dealing with an attack that came from a Class 8 soul tool. Hikaitu revealed a cold smile on his face. He didn't even verify whether the shots he fired were successful before he immediately retracted his egg-shaped soul tool. A ball-shaped soul tool drifted above his hand and the egg-shaped soul tool. A layer of icy fog was released and helped to dissipate the heat from his egg-shaped soul tool, while he quickly took out the milk bottles inside the base of his egg-shaped soul tool and put them away. If those soul engineers knew that 24 Class 6 sealed milk bottles had been completely drained in an instant, they might not be very confident in how they were reacting. A middle-aged man in a purple warrior robe charged furiously out from his tent in the area where the Northern Legion of Soul Engineers was quartered, and he immediately raged, "What's going on? Vice Commander, there are sudden, intense soul power undulations coming from inside the city. We aren't sure what's going on either." Just as they were speaking, a series of tremendous booms had already sounded in the sky. Terrifying soul power undulations caused a dazzling scene of fireworks to appear in the sky. More than 95% of the stationary shells fired from the 10 Juga divine crossbow cannons were successfully intercepted and blew apart in the sky. Clown, go send people over to check the situation out, now. The vice captain had a strong look of contempt as he saw the exploding lights in the sky. Does this intruder have a problem with his brain? He's playing with soul tools with our Sun-Moon Empire. At this moment, an extremely sharp alarm suddenly rang out. This caused the vice leader's expression to immediately change. Not good, our aerial soul tools have temporarily been rendered ineffective, so we can't use them for targeting. Our enemies still have another move, so we need to activate all defenses. I'll go to the main control area of the military front. Right? There was no one who could beat the Sun-Moon Empire in terms of proficiency in soul tools, as well their use in military warfare. Even Shrek Academy wasn't an exception to this. However, Huo Yuhao was the only person who'd successfully completed the ultimate soldier plan, while He Kai-Tu was an outstanding soul engineer who was bound to be a star of Shrek Academy. They were naturally not too worried about the Sun-Moon Empire when it came to the overall strength of their soul tools. If they were to launch a carefully planned surprise attack that used all of the Tang Sect's resources, how could they not have a chance of succeeding? Another 180 beams of light surged into the firework-filled sky. Every single beam was extremely accurate, as if their paths had been measured with a ruler. They left brilliant trails of fire in the sky as they flew, and their blazing glows instantly carved out another dazzling wave of light in the sky. The time taken between the first and second waves of the Zhuge divine crossbow cannons was very short, astonishing all onlookers. This was one of the benefits of using stationary soul cannons. There was no need to charge up soul power for each shot. As long as there was enough ammo, much more firepower could be used at the same time. Although the Zhuge divine crossbow cannon had already been sold to the three empires of the original Dolor continent, they'd never truly appeared on a battlefield before. All of the defenses set up by the Sun-Moon Empire had been geared towards Soul Master and Soul Tools. After using Huo Yuhao's spiritual detection to lock onto their targets, they used the first wave of shots to act as a guide, while using the second wave to act as the true killer. At the same time, they used a Class 8 stationary soul cannon to control the northern city front. This was a plan that was completely directed at the aerial soul tools, and could be said to be flawless. Furthermore, all of the aerial soul detectors in the air crumbled to dust due to the blazing hot explosives amidst the firework-filled sky. The godly might of the Zhuge divine crossbow cannon once again revealed itself, and a third wave was once again fired in a short period of time. They didn't target the northern city this time around. Instead, it was fired at the eastern and western city walls. After He Kai-Tu fired the Class 8 stationary soul cannon, he'd completed a simple tuning of the crossbow cannons. The Soul Engineer legions stationed in the western and eastern parts of the city simply had no way of stopping these stationary soul cannons. This was because they'd fired at a much lower trajectory than before. Combined with the lack of aerial surveillance soul tools, they'd turned into blind men. How could they blindly fire their soul tools towards the city? Just as the third wave of cannons were fired, that brilliant beam of golden light collided with the northern city's protective barrier. Boom! The earth shook, and mountains quaked. A terrifying explosion shook the heavens and the earth, and even Radiant City could faintly hear the loud explosions from this place. The protective barrier over at the Soul Engineer Legion front was on the verge of collapse, but they were able to take this barrage of attacks. The commander, who'd already rushed to the core of the front, suddenly had a change in expression and finally let out a long sigh. It's still good. This is only the strength of a Class 7 stationary soul cannon. Otherwise, our protective barrier wouldn't be standing. Pass down my commands. Everyone, use all of your soul power and increase the reserves of soul power in our defensive soul tools. Fire all of our backup aerial surveillance soul tools towards the sky. Although the aerial surveillance soul tools in the air were already a large part of their reserves, they were still reserves. However, though there weren't a lot of reserves, something was better than nothing. Since they were already used to aerial surveillance soul tools guiding them in battle, they didn't dare to act rashly at all with the lack of their little toys. The vice captain, who was the acting commander at the military front, had an expression so ugly that he wanted to die. He fiercely said to himself, "Don't these good-for-nothings in the city know how many stationary soul tools they've set up? You'd need at least 300 Class 4, or stronger stationary soul cannons to generate this amount of force. You'd need at least 3,000 square meters to set something like that up. Why didn't these incompetent bastards notice that many soul tools in the city? They are truly thorough bastards. Why do I feel the earth shaking a bit? Quick, where are our land surveillance soul tools? Go check on them. Don't tell me that a dragon has woken up. Just as the vice captain was muttering to himself, his expression suddenly changed enormously. The ground beneath him had already transformed into a patch of gold, and the area that this patch covered had already far exceeded the area that their Soul Engineer Legion front had stationed themselves in. Class 7. No, that's a Class 8. Also, it's a Class 8 like the one the illustrious Virtue Hall meticulously crafted, one that's specifically geared towards taking down defensive fronts like this one. As the violent explosions rang out, nobody was able to see an even more piercing golden light vigorously tunnel itself into the ground. After that, it quietly traveled several hundred meters beneath the ground to arrive at the core of their military front. Then, boom. A terrifying golden light instantly transformed the entirety of the northern city into a golden sea. An enormous ball of golden light, that resembled the early stages of sunrise, revealed itself from the ground. Not even 10 people were able to activate their personal soul barriers and invincible barriers in time to block and escape from this terrifyingly huge explosion that was like punishment from the heavens. At this exact same time, the walls of the western and eastern cities each received a baptism from 90 stationary soul cannons. These were stationary soul cannons. Just how large were these cities? They were only mock-ups of ordinary cities. A large number of soul detectors and defensive soul tools stationed on the two city walls blossomed with resplendent light. Due to the limited area of the city walls, the soul tools stationed there were mostly soul detectors, aimed outside and inside the city. Who would have thought that they'd actually be attacked, given that there were two Soul Engineer legions stationed outside the city walls? Furthermore, this had been done from the inside. Because of that, the defensive power of the city walls weren't strong enough. This was also the correct decision made by Huo Yuhao after carrying out a thorough investigation. Because of that, the various expensive soul detectors on the city walls shattered after their defensive soul tools couldn't withstand the continuous bombardment of Huo Yuhao's stationary soul cannons. In the next instant, over a third of the city walls collapsed. He Kaitu was not happy at all. He put the perfect Class 8 stationary soul cannon he'd just fired away, then quickly put the Zhuge divine crossbow cannons away as well. However, from the racket he could hear outside, he knew that he didn't have much time left. Why was he not happy? Moreover, why did he look like he was attending a funeral? This was because he couldn't bear to do it. He felt pained. Those were 360 stationary soul cannon shells. An overwhelming majority of them had been taken from Radiant City, and these 360 stationary soul cannons shells were around a third of the total Class 4 stationary soul cannons they'd taken back. The total value of these soul tools couldn't even be measured with money. However, Bei had let them bring all of this to ensure they would be able to safely overwhelm their opponents during the course of this mission. Within a short minute, they had squandered all of this. The Zhuge divine crossbow cannon was truly powerful. It was absolutely much more powerful than any other soul tool of its class. However, the firing of this terrifying array of cannon shells was backed by countless amounts of gold. It would have been slightly better if they'd used soul power instead. For example, in a situation like this, where they'd used stationary soul cannons. It was true that stationary soul cannons were powerful and their effects were superb. However, they'd also caused so much heartache that it would render one unable to breathe. Damn it. These brats are coming really quickly. I have to go. Babies, I can't bear to part with you guys. Hikaitu, who'd only managed to keep 2 Zhuge divine crossbow cannons, took out a miniature floating soul detector from midair. He looked at the bright red light on it, then looked at the other 8 crossbow cannons with a look of unwillingness. Then, he clenched his teeth and jumped off the roof. The instant he jumped out, a pitch-black soul cannon appeared on his shoulder. Without any booms or whatnot, a dark figure shot towards the direction of the northern city and vanished into the night. Without any aerial surveillance soul tools around, nobody had noticed his movement. Just as Hikaitu quietly snuck away, everyone within Sunrise City started to move about as though they'd been awakened. The cold-faced Ma Xiaodao had already flown towards the northern city along with the 3rd and 4th elders. The instant they rose into the air, what they saw was an astonishing, enormously large explosion of gold. The defense of the water prison was paramount. Thus, even Ma Xiaodao couldn't drag Zhong Li and his brothers away at this point in time. She could only warn them to carefully guard the water prison before leaving. While Sunrise City was in a state of chaos, nobody noticed that a person had borrowed the cover of darkness to quietly lie down beside the southern moat. This person quietly dipped into the moat. Huo Yuhao had borrowed the opportunity granted to him by the destruction of the aerial surveillance Soul tools to slip away stealthily from the city walls. This time around, he used the same old trick. He'd used his spiritual power to seal his soul power, then used his ultimate ice to lower his body temperature. By using his ultimate ice to lower his body temperature, all the remaining soul tools would be rendered ineffective for a short period of time. Naturally, Huo Yuhao would be at his weakest during this period of time as well. He relied completely on the physical strength of a soul emperor to cross the city walls. Combined with his spiritual interference, he was able to leave the city without alerting anyone. He was now lying by the moat to slowly recover his soul power. By the time the terrifying explosion caused by the Class 8 stationary soul cannon occurred, he'd nearly removed the seal placed on his soul power. Only then did he quietly submerge himself into the water and dig his way into the water prison. This time around, what he used was his physical body and not his spiritual avatar. Once he entered the water prison, it wouldn't be easy for him to leave. Huo Yuhao performed a cursory observation of the water prison with his spiritual power. Very quickly, he discovered the lively soul power contained within the various soul masters and soul engineers it held. Even if they weren't fully recovered, they had enough strength to fight one battle at least. Huo Yuhao held onto the metal railings of the water prison with a single hand and used the other to push against the water in the moat. A jade-green light rose from his body, and the little snow lady quietly appeared by his side. The current snow lady was already a big kid, who looked around 8 or 9. A noble and cold look had already replaced her originally cute face, making her seem much like the original snow lady. An extremely chilly intent instantly spread outwards, freezing the moat outside at a speed that the naked eye could see. The little snow lady nodded softly towards Huo Yuhao, then gently twisted about in the water to reach the depths of the moat. Unexpectedly, one could see snowflakes fluttering around her, even underwater. The moat, which was originally flowing vigorously, had been blocked by a wall of ice after a short period of time. The area of this wall of ice then covered both sides of the moat at an astonishing speed. With the snow lady here, Huo Yuhao simply didn't need to do anything. With a wave of his right hand, the dark golden terror claws shot out and noiselessly tore the metal railings apart. His use of ultimate ice was perfect. Just like how the water in the water prison wouldn't flow outwards, the extreme cold within it wouldn't diffuse out either. Otherwise, a large problem could occur if they were to freeze everyone within the water prison. After quietly submerging and swimming around in the water, Huo Yuhao began to spread his spiritual power out to cover the entirety of the water prison. At this moment, the evil soul masters within the water prison were somewhat nervous. The Zhong brothers were huddled together on another side of the water prison, which was also its true entrance. Never in their wildest dreams would they have imagined that somebody would enter the water prison via the moat under the surveillance of so many soul detectors on the southern city walls. From what they were aware of, the moat water still contained the extremely toxic soul exterminating powder. If a soul master was to swim within the water, their soul power would quickly be dispersed. What threat would they be able to pose then? Huo Yuhao's spiritual power deliberately avoided the area where the Zhong brothers were and even the hostages, who were by their side. For the sake of preventing any accidents, it was sufficient to inform a large number of people, but not all, of what was going to happen. Everyone, make your preparations. Huo Yuhao's thoughts were quickly transmitted into the minds of the hostages, by way of his spiritual detection. The hostages, who'd been acting as though they were weak all this while, immediately felt their spirits rise. In reality, they were already doing their best to hold themselves back after recovering their soul power. Although there were quite a few evil soul masters here, they were insignificant compared to the number of hostages held here. They were still somewhat fearful of the two evil title Doluor from before, but the number of evil soul masters left here was clearly much less than before. Were it not for the elders restraining them, some of the younger hostages would have been unable to stop themselves from trying to escape. After being held captive here for a few months, the gloominess pent up in their hearts could be imagined. Huo Yuhao didn't tell them what the signal to move was, because there was simply no need for that. The southern city walls. All of the patrolling soldiers were staring at the northern city. The brilliant golden light that had risen into the air had finally started to disperse, though there were still sparks faintly flying about along the walls of the eastern and western city. The sounds of the violent explosions from those areas made the atmosphere in the southern city extraordinarily tense. Many of the soldiers stationed there felt inwardly happy. Fortunately, nothing had happened to them. What are you looking at? Get to your places, what are you doing? A strict voice suddenly rang out. As he started shouting, the various soldiers rushed back to their positions. "Commander, take a look at this." What is this?" A soldier in charge of a soul detector cried out in surprise. The originally angry commander quickly ran over. "What's the situation?" "Commander, there are undulations of soul power. However, we can't see anyone at all." The soldier pointed at the simple soul screen in front of him. Large, greenish ripples were floating about on the screen in front of him. This signified that there was an extremely strong and wide undulation of soul power in the city below him. The commander was at a loss as well. He immediately took a look at the other soul detectors around him and discovered that they were all inactive. Nor did he discover any life signs of any living creatures. Only the soul detector in front of him had produced this result. "Commander, you'd better come over here." Another soldier at a different area cried out. "What now?" The commander quickly rushed over. The soldier pointed at the screen in front of him, dumbstruck. "My thermal soul tool seems to have malfunctioned. It's showing that the temperature underground is dropping madly." How can this be?" "The temperature of the ground beneath us is dropping." The commander quickly stretched his head to look down the wall, and the soldier next to him turned on a soul lamp to light up the area. The city walls around Sunrise City weren't too tall. When the light from the soul lamp illuminated the moat, the commander finally discovered what the problem was. He suddenly let out an ear-piercing screech. Enemy attack. Why would the moat suddenly freeze for no reason? He himself was a soul master, and he could guess the reason for this. Only a soul master could cause an astonishing phenomenon like this. Unfortunately, he'd made his discovery too late. The water prison. When the little snow lady quietly returned to Huo Yuhao's body, his eyes lit up. It was time. His body shook slightly, and the soul thrusters on his back caused Huo Yuhao to shoot out from the water with a whoosh. The moment he appeared, he immediately attracted the attention of every single hostage and evil soul master. Even the Zhong brothers, who were discussing the situation outside, were not an exception to this. 5 soul rings rose from Huo Yuhao's feet one after another. For the sake of attracting even more of his opponent's attention, he made all 5 of these soul rings glow with a blood-red light. His 3rd soul ring lit up, and a white layer of light instantly spread out from Huo Yuhao's body. Mass enfeeblement. Huo Yuhao didn't hold anything back at a time like this. The instant he released his mass enfeeblement, Huo Yuhao clenched his fist in midair. The violent sound of an explosion instantly rang out. The reason why ice explosion was known as a godly skill was because of its terrifying effect whenever there was sufficient ice. Although ice explosion couldn't be used within the moat due to a lack of soul power that could be used to trigger it, it had transformed into Huo Yuhao's best source of gunpowder after it was frozen. The large moat had been frozen solid, causing the violent explosion from Huo Yuhao's skill to spread all the way to the outside. This was also the exact instant that the commander yelled out. After receiving so many new hostages, the overall defenses of Sunrise City had increased by a few levels. However, the only thing that didn't change was the thickness of its city walls. After all, this was just a small city. They'd only set this whole shebang up to draw in people from the Doluo continent's 3 empires, who would attempt to rescue the hostages. There was no way that they'd specifically reinforce the city walls for this. Because of that, the foundations of the southern walls were thoroughly shaken by the explosion of the moat. It seemed as though the entire earth was trembling within the water prison. The violent rumbling, as well as Huo Yuhao rushing out of the water, was already the best signal he could give the hostages. Rays of light began to glow within the prison. The hostages, who'd gone through countless hardships during their imprisonment, finally went all out. The prison could keep them in while their soul power was limited, but how could it withstand the might of several experts who'd recovered their soul power? The entire prison was destroyed in an instant. The instant the prisoners rushed out, they launched a wave of long-range soul skills towards the evil soul masters guarding the prison. Everything was shaking at this moment, and the wall had already begun to collapse. The other entrance of the water prison, which was where Huo Yuhao had entered, had already been blown apart. Everything had perfectly gone according to Huo Yuhao's plan. Although the Zhong brothers reacted instantly, they were facing several hundred soul masters. This group of soul masters didn't just consist of the students, who were representing their various academies and sects. There were also a few teachers, leaders and experts as well. There was no lack of 7-ringed and 8-ringed existences within this group. During their imprisonment, they'd suffered at the hands of these evil soul masters. They'd lived in suffering and neared the border between life and death every day. When this pent-up anger instantly exploded, even evil soul masters would be afraid of them going all out with no regard for their lives. A few of the several dozen evil soul masters were instantly destroyed by the first wave of attacks. Although the Zhong brothers didn't really understand why the hostages had regained their combat strength, they could only run away at top speed. Otherwise, they would definitely be torn to shreds by these people. At the same time, several kilometers away from the south side of the city, Shusansha stood on a small hill, looking toward Sunrise City. The sounds of explosions from Sunrise City signified that the plan had fully started. They were now waiting for the signal for the next part of the plan. This video will end here.